Hi guys and welcome back to the channel. I'm Thomas, thank you all so much for being here, and I just realised how loud I shouted that then. Hi guys and welcome back to the channel. I'm Thomas, thank you all so much for being here. In today's video, as you've seen from the title, we are going to be talking everything needles, so from cartridges to needle bars, what all the letters and numbers mean on the box, what to buy, what to use, how to use them, everything you're possibly going to need to know about needles. And if I forget anything, I'm sure you guys will mention it all down in the comments and I'll try and do my best to answer as per usual. So with that being said, we'll keep the intro nice and short and sweet, and we'll jump straight into talking about needles. So yeah, watch the intro on, and then we'll get straight into it. So first things first, we're going to go over the guess who of tattoo needles, in the sense that we're going to just reduce everything down by half and we're going to make things really simple. So first of all, the two different types of needles that you can get currently are needle bars and cartridges. So the main fundamental difference between these is how they operate in a tattoo machine. So a needle bar, obviously you've got the full bar. We have spoke about this in one of my other previous videos, so make sure to go and check that out. This is mainly if you're going to be using a coil tattoo machine. They stick onto the top of the machine and that gives you the whole bar, which is the sort of more traditional way of tattooing. Things have now developed a little bit. So now we use the cartridge system, which are fully disposable. So the whole tip, tube and everything is in that. That goes into a grip. These are mainly used on rotary machines, but you can reconfigure a coil machine to be able to take cartridges. Most people just use rotaries if you're gonna use cartridges. The main similarities between these are obviously where the needles are. So configuration wise, they're all gonna be pretty much the same. The main way that they work and how they're different, if you imagine taking the needle bar, chopping that off and put it into this cartridge, that's basically all you're doing with those. From a tattooing point of view, that's the main difference. Actually hitting the skin and producing a tattoo, they're both gonna do the same job. It's mainly down to the difference of machines that's gonna make a massive difference to the piece. You'll speak to some tattoo artists that do prefer one or the other. For me and most of my tattooing friends, cartridges are the way forward. They're a lot easier, a lot simpler, makes your life a lot more streamlined, means you can have a lot more flexibility with the cartridges that you choose on the day. But that is the basic difference between a needle bar and a tattoo cartridge. So moving on from cartridges and needle bars, we've then got the configurations of the needles. So these come in all different shapes and sizes, and they've all got slightly different jobs that they can do. They all fundamentally do the same job in the sense that they pierce the skin and they deposit ink. However, based on different art designs and different styles of tattooing that you're doing, you're going to want different tools to do different jobs. So if you imagine painting a room, if you want to cover a big area, you're going to use a specific tool like a roller. And if you want to get into the little tight edges and cut in, you're going to use a smaller paintbrush. It's a similar thing with tattoo needles. If you want to cover a large area, you use a larger needle configuration. And if you're trying to do fine detail, fine line work, or fine coloring in, you're going to want to use a smaller needle configuration. So the basic configurations of tattoo needles, you're going to start with a round liner, which does pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. It's a round configuration of needles, which allow you to do fine line work, or as you move up the needle groupings, you're going to be able to do big, thick power lines. You have a round shader, which is very similar to a round liner in the sense that you've got a round configuration of needles. They're going to be slightly looser, a bit more spread out, allow for better ink saturation, and it's going to allow you to color in with those and do a little bit of soft shading to a certain extent. After the round configurations, you start getting into the flat configurations. So it's again what it says on the tin. Instead of it being round, it's going to be a row of needles. This allows you to cover a bigger area. So again, if you go back to thinking about a paintbrush, you're going from a small little fine detail brush to a fatter brush. You can allow you to cover a slightly larger area a little bit faster, and it's going to allow you to get those nice softer tones in. Moving on from the flats, you've got what they call a magnum shader. This is very similar to a flat in the sense that it's a flat row of needles. But what you have is you have another row stacked on top and interweaved. This allows for double saturation in essence, because you've got two rows of needles hitting the skin. It's great for color packing, it's great for soft black and gray shading, anywhere you need to cover sort of larger area. And then as well as the magnum shaders, you have what they call a curved magnum or a soft edge magnum. Both of these are exactly the same. If you imagine a flat shader where you've got all your needles neatly in a row, a curved mag is sort of like your fingers in that the edges are slightly stacked down. This stops you from getting what they call mag marks and edge marks. So as you're shading through this skin on a curved area, if you've got a flat row of needles hitting that skin, you've got a potential of catching an edge, which is going to dig that needle in a little bit heavier, and you're going to see those lines. It's going to make it harder for you to smooth out when doing soft black and grey shading. If you've got a soft edge mag, because those edges are pulled up slightly as you're shading, it's going to allow you to just get those soft shades without digging anything in too deep. It's going to reduce the surface area ever so slightly, but you can then stack up the needle size and still cover a large area. As well as these basic configurations, you've also got some special configurations that keep popping up every now and again. So like power liners, blackout mags, stipple shaders, hollow liners, tight liners. All of these are very similar and they're all based off the basic design of a tattoo needle. They just have very specific jobs. So for example, the blackout mags are just massive mags that will allow you to black out large areas. The stipple shaders, they're basically 3 round liners put together, so it gives you that nice sort of whip shading effect. But for the rest of this video, we're just going to talk about the basic tattoo needle configurations. So what do the letters and numbers mean on the box? So if you get a box of needles, these are needle bar needles. You'll know that there is a code on the box. It's the same with cartridges, same with all the needles. Different companies have different ways of portraying this combination, but they generally are trying to portray the same information. So the first number that you'll generally find on a box is going to be the gauge. So normally you'll get 8, 10, and 12. This is basically the size of the needle. After that, you're going to get another number, which then depicts how many needles are in that configuration. So 5, 7, 9, etc. Moving on from that, you're going to have some letters. So the letters are going to indicate what configuration the needle's in. So if it's a curved mag, it might be CM. If it was a round liner, it might be RL, etc. I'll put a list on the screen which shows you all the different configuration types. Obviously, you'll have to take this with a pinch of salt. Some companies mix them around and turn them this way and that. So if you have, let's say, like a tight liner, it won't be TL, it might be LT. But once you've gone through the list and you understand sort of how they sort of work, it'll all start making sense and you'll be able to sort of quickly understand what they're trying to portray. Like I say, different companies will mix them up and move them around, but all that information should be there so you can get the right needles for the job that you're trying to do. So going into a bit more depth with these, the gauge of the needle, which like I say is normally the first number. It can also sometimes be referred to in slightly different ways, so like bug pin, regular, tight, loose. But the gauge generally means the diameter of the needle. So within tattooing, and as far as I've been concerned, and I've not really been concerned with too much sort of extra specials, different sizes, but you normally have 3. The 3 different types, you'll have an 8, 10, and 12. So 10 is obviously sort of like your middle go-to. 12 will be a little bit looser, so that will give you like slightly fatter sort of deposit of ink, and then 8 will be a bit more bug pin. So the different sizes in physical size terms would be 0.25 mil, 0.3 mil, 0.3 mil, and 0.35 mil. So that's 8, 10, and 12. The main fundamental difference between these and why you choose different sort of gauges is purely down to your personal preference. Obviously, the bigger the gauge, the bigger hole it's going to puncture into the skin. So potentially by opening the skin up that little bit more, it's going to deposit more ink and it's going to give you more saturation. So if you're color packing, it might be worth looking at using sort of like a 12 gauge needle. And if you're trying to do soft black and gray to get those soft, smooth tones, it might be worth using a bug pin. This is all personal preference. You can achieve everything with every different size gauge of needle. You can color pack with a bug pen and you can do soft shading with a 12. It might make your life a little bit more difficult, but between these 3, it's all down to your personal preference, the finish you want from your art and how you want it to work. For me, I've always sort of lent more towards bug pins, mainly just doing black and grey realism. It sort of helps with my style to get that nice soft smooth tones. So if you've ever seen in my time lapses, I get a lot of comments about how I get things so smooth. For me, I feel like it's mainly to do with the bug pins, obviously technique, how I run my machine, the machine that I use, the power that I put through my machine, all are contributing factors to this. But that just gives you an idea of what that first number and the gauge means within the tattoo needle. The second number on the box is going to indicate the amount of needles that you've got. So if we take a bug pin, for example, it should read 08 and then it's going to be the amount of needles. So it might say 03, it might say 07, might say 15. So that number is literally going to mean the amount of needles that are in that configuration. So for example, if it was a 3 bug pin round liner, you'd have 08, 03, which would be 3 needles pulled together to a point. If it was 08, 05, it'd be 5. If it was 7, 7, etc. The main reason for bumping up the size is obviously to get a thicker needle. So if you're using a 3 bug pen, it's going to give you a very, very fine line. So if you're doing fine line work, if you're trying to put eyelashes on a portrait, that's going to be the needle of choice for you. If you're trying to do some traditional work and trying to get some big, thick sort of outlines and that strong traditional tattoo look, you're going to be wanting to bump up to like 9, 11, 15 sort of round liners. get those big power lines in there, make your piece look really nice and bold and strong. Again, a lot of this is trial and error. It all depends on what you want as an artist with those needles. Alongside the amount of needles, the gauge will increase the size very slightly. Again, there's a lot of other contributing factors like how you run your machine, your hand speed, how tight you have the skin stretched, the quality of skin from your client. All of these are contributing factors to how thick that line can be. So again, it's a little bit of trial and error. However, a little bit like buying fine liners, it is going to give you a rough guide as to how thick that line is more or less going to be once it hits the skin. So what are the benefits of changing your configuration? So as we touched on before, all of this is a little bit like painting a wall. So if you're trying to cover a big area, it makes sense to use a slightly larger configuration to cover those areas. And if you're trying to do fine work, fine detail, fine lines, you're going to want a more tighter configuration of needles. So for example, if you're doing a rose, if you've seen my rose time lapses, you'll see that I do those in a very specific way every single time. And I stick to that whenever I do roses. So I'll first of all do what they call a scratch line or a grey line throughout the piece. For this, I'll use the Type 3 round liner, so 0803 LT. That'll allow me to put a nice fine line in using a light grey wash that you're not going to see. That line's not going to get picked up once I finish the piece, or it's going to be very, very small once it's all healed. So that after that, the first thing I'll start looking at doing is getting a bit of background in, because I'll be just wanting to get that nice and smooth on the skin and cover a larger area. I'll use something like a curved 15 mag. That's going to cover a larger area and keep it all nice and smooth and very softly saturated into the skin. As I move through the petals and they start getting smaller, I'll reduce that down to a 7 curve mag, so I'll almost half the size. This will allow me then to get into the smaller areas without causing too much trauma to the skin. It'll still allow me to keep everything nice and soft. And as I get into the very tight, complicated section in the middle, I'll go back to using my liner, which is like my 3 round liner. And that'll allow me just to get in those little tiny areas that are just a little bit too small for my mag. So for me, I use liners and shaders very similarly. For me, I use liners and shaders in a very similar way, just so I can get into all the areas without causing too much trauma, keeping everything nice and smooth and staying very true to my reference. The other configurations that we spoke about, so like a flat mag, the flat shaders and the round shaders, again, these are also very good for doing a similar sort of thing. So if you use them in the same sort of way as what I've just spoke about, sort of covering areas and getting into tiny details, the round shaders will be good for packing in color in slightly smaller areas that you can't get in with your mag, whereas the flat shaders with the 1 row would be good for geometric work, anywhere where you need to be very accurate, getting the flat shader against an edge and being able to mag out. The downside to a mag is you've got a potential of catching that top row and it's not going to be as accurate to get right to the edge. The flat shaders sometimes can have a bit of an advantage getting right to the edge of those lines, so you're not sort of crossing the line, you're keeping all your shading nice and neat. But again, it's just a case of seeing what works for you, seeing what configuration works for the style of tattooing and the artwork that you're producing. The other thing that throws a spanner into the mix is textured or smooth. The main fundamental differences between textured and smooth needles. Smooth needle is going to be highly polished. Textured one is going to be a little bit more rough. When I say rough, it's not going to physically feel rough, but it's not going to be as smooth and as polished as a smooth one. So the main fundamental difference between these and why they have benefits as a textured one, the idea behind them is by having all these tiny little holes and imperfections in the needle, it's going to hold on to a lot more ink. It's going to give you a lot more saturation into the skin. So if you're color packing, trying to get things really, really solid, really packed and saturated into the skin, they might give you a little bit more of an advantage. It means you don't have to dip as much. It means you can get more ink into the skin. However, this might increase pain for your client. It might make it a little bit more uncomfortable and it might cause more trauma to the skin. It's gonna be very, very microscopic differences in that sense, but it's worth trying, worth experimenting with. It's not gonna make too much of a difference to the quality of the tattoo or the heel. On the other side of it, you've got the polished ones, which is the main needle that you're gonna find across the board. It's gonna cause less trauma. It's gonna be a lot more smooth to the skin. It's gonna reduce a little bit more redness. However, you are gonna have to dip more because it's not gonna hold as much ink. So with that polished surface, the ink is potentially gonna slide off. However, it is the go-to. So you'll find that most needles that you buy are gonna be the polished steel as opposed to the textured ones. So it might be harder to find the texture, but if you can find some, it's worth grabbing a box, giving it a try, seeing if that sort of helps with you and your tattoo style. So that is the basic overall of tattoo needles from a buying point of view. If there's anything you feel like I haven't told you, please drop it in the comments and I'll try my best to answer those questions. The main thing I will say is that all companies do list their needles slightly differently. They are a lot more clear than what they used to be back in the day. so it is a bit more obvious what you're buying. A lot of them have photos and images of each individual tattoo needle in the groupings. Hopefully through this video you'd have a better understanding about the groupings, what they do, what they're used for, and what they look like. A lot of the time with tattoo needles it's going to be trial and error. It's going to be a case of finding a manufacturer that you like, trying to find a grouping that you like, and then making that work for your art and for your tattoo style. And like I say, for like coverage and the sort of tattoos that you're doing, so if it's fine detail or you're covering big areas with heavy color saturation, different needles are going to work slightly better for you. It is going to be a case of trying to get hold of different types, trying out different things. But hopefully this is giving you a rough idea as to what all the information on the box means, all the different needle configurations. And like I say, if you want to know more, drop it in the comments. But with all that being said, thank you all so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell icon. And with all that being said, I will see you all on the next video. Peace.